Okay, so today we're going to do names of compounds, which is on page 81 of your textbook. Now, I'm going to just give you my own summary of what it is, but basically we're going to learn how to name compounds, and it's very simple. Now, the first time of naming compounds is when you're dealing with compounds that are made up of two elements. Now, compounds are just two or more elements together. So when you're dealing with a compound that is made up of two elements, the rules or the steps you will follow is, the first thing you will do is you will name the first element. So because there's two elements here, you're going to take the one that's written first and name it, and then you're going to name the second element. And what you're going to do with the second element is, instead of writing its actual name, you're going to take its name and you're going to change it so that the end of the name ends in "ide." Right, so let's look at an example because that's the best way to learn. Right, so we have this compound which is H2O, and all of you know H2O is water. Now it has two elements. It has hydrogen and it has oxygen. Now when I mean two elements, I don't mean the number that they give you here. I mean it has two different elements, which means in this case you have hydrogen, which is one element, and oxygen, which is another element. So because it has two elements, the name has to end in "ide." Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to name the first element. Now the first element is most of the time the one that is written first, and in this case, can you see hydrogen is written first? So you're going to have hydrogen. Right, then after we name the first element, we're going to name the second element, and we're going to change the ending of that element to "ide." Now the second element, right, so then you're going to take the second element, and in this case the second element is oxygen. Now what we're going to do is, instead of saying oxygen, we're going to change oxygen so that the word oxygen ends in "ide." So what that will become, instead of oxygen, it will become oxide. So I'm going to name the first element, which in this case is hydrogen. Then I'm going to name the second element, but it's going to end in "ide." So it will become hydrogen, and then oxygen will become oxide. So H2O's proper chemical name is hydrogen oxide. Okay, now when you see something that has two elements, automatically that name has to end in "ide." If it doesn't end in "ide, then it means you're doing something wrong. Okay, let's do another example. Right, let's look at this compound here. So you have one element which is calcium, and then you have another element which is chlorine. Now again, when I tell you two elements, I do not mean this numbers here, so just ignore all of the small numbers you see here. Just look at the actual element itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to name the first element. So the first element here is calcium, so there's it there, calcium. Then we're going to name the second element, and we're going to change the ending of that name to "ide." So the second element in this case is chlorine. So I'm going to take chlorine and change the ending to "ide." So instead of chlorine, it's going to become chloride. So the name of this will be calcium, which is the first element, and then chloride. And can you see it ends in "ide, which tells you that it only has two elements in it. Now if you look, you can see that oxygen will always become oxide. Chlorine will become chloride. So nowhere are you going to have the word chlorine in it. It's just going to be chloride. Right, let's do another one. Here we have LiBr. Can you see Li is one element, which is lithium. Bromine is another element, which is Br. So there's two elements, so again the name has to end in "ide." So what we do is we first name the first element. So the first element is lithium, so you write lithium. Then the second element is bromine. Now bromine, the ending has to be changed to "ide, so it will become bromide. So the name of this element will be lithium bromide. So can you see, it's quite simple. All you have to do is name the first element, name the second element, and end it to "ide." Alright, let's look at another one. So you have again here Mg, which is magnesium, and S, which is sulfur. So there's two elements, so again the name has to end in "ide." So first we're going to name the first element, which is magnesium. So there is the magnesium. And then we're going to take sulfur and we're going to end it in "ide. And when you take sulfur and end it in "ide, it becomes sulfide. So the name of this element will be magnesium sulfide. So again, let's just go over it one more time. If you have two elements in a compound, you just write down the name of the first element, then you write down the name of the second element, and you end it in "ide. And that's all that you need to do. Right, now we're going to go on to naming elements that have, or naming compounds that have three elements in them, and one of that element is oxygen. Okay, so we're dealing now not with 2 elements, with 3 elements, and one of their elements has to be an oxygen. Now, the steps or the rules for naming it is quite similar to naming compounds that have 2 elements. So what you're going to do is you're going to name the first element just like before, and then you're going to name the second element, and instead of changing that ending to "ide" like how we did with 2 elements, you are now going to change it to "ate." Now, because this element has oxygen in it, it has to end in "ate." Now, when you are naming compounds that have 3 elements, we don't actually put oxygen anywhere in that name. So oxygen, we won't even say oxide or oxate. We will ignore oxygen completely, because when something ends in "ate," automatically it tells you that there is oxygen in it. So you don't have to even mention the word oxygen or anything that has to do with oxygen in that name. So if something ends in "ate," it means it has oxygen in it, and oxygen doesn't have to be in that name. Right, so you're not going to name the oxygen itself. Right, let's go into examples. So we have here this compound which is KNO3. Now I told you when it comes to numbers, just ignore it because the numbers doesn't really mean anything here. Now let's first count how many elements in this compound. We have K, which is potassium, we have nitrogen, and we have oxygen. So there is 3 elements in this compound, and one of them is oxygen. Can you see that? We have oxygen here. Now because it has oxygen, the name must end in "ate," but we're not going to name the oxygen itself. So let us start naming this compound. So what we're going to do is we're first going to name the first element, and in this case it's the one that's written first, which is K, so it is potassium. So you're going to write down potassium. Then you're going to name the second element, and you're going to change the ending to "ate." Now the second element here is nitrogen. Can you see that? Now we're going to say potassium, and then we have to name nitrogen, but it's not going to end in nitrogen. It's going to end in "ate." So the nitrogen will become nitrate. So this compound's name is potassium nitrate. Now if you look at this name, can you see that we have nowhere in this name an oxygen? We didn't say oxygen, oxate, oxide, nothing that has to do with oxygen, because if you see the "ate" at the end, automatically it tells you there is an oxygen in it, so you don't even have to name the oxygen. So it just becomes potassium nitrate. Okay, let's do another one. Right, let's look at this compound. So you have Na, which is sodium, you have carbon, and you have oxygen. Now there is 3 elements in here. 1, 2, 3, and one of them is oxygen, and most of the time the oxygen will be written last. So you'll see there's 1 oxygen here, which means this has to end in "ate." So again, the steps we're going to follow is the same. You're first going to name the first element, and here the first element is sodium, so you're going to write down sodium. Then you're going to name the second element, and you're going to end it in "ate," and again we're not going to name oxygen anywhere in this element, in this compound. So we're going to take carbon, and we're going to change carbon to "ate." So it's going to become sodium carbonate. Now I know some of you might think it will become carbate, but no, it becomes carbonate. Okay, so the name of this Na2CO3 is called sodium carbonate. Again, because it ends in "ate," it means there is an oxygen in this compound, and nowhere in the name do we even mention oxygen. Okay, right, let's do another one. So we have here AlPO4. Al is 1 element, and please remember, elements all start with a capital letter. So because this is a small letter L, it means it's part of this element here. So you have Al, which is aluminium, you have P, which is phosphorus, and then you have O, which is oxygen. So there is 3 elements in this compound: aluminium, phosphorus, and oxygen. And one of them is oxygen, which means again it's going to end in "ate." So we're going to do the same thing. You're first going to name the first element, which in this case is aluminium. So you write down aluminium. And then the second element is phosphorus, and we're going to change the ending of this phosphorus word into "ate." So phosphorus will become phosphate. So the name of this compound is aluminium phosphate, and again nowhere is there oxygen even mentioned here. So phosphorus will always become phosphate. Right, let's do the last example. So you have your Li2SO4. Again, let's count how many elements. So you have Li, which is 1, lithium. Then you have sulfur, that's the second one, and you have oxygen, that's the third one. So there's 3 elements in here. One of them is oxygen, so it will end in 8. So the rules stays the same. So we're going to name the first element, which here is lithium. So you're going to write down lithium. Then we're going to name the second element, which is sulfur. And now sulfur, we're going to change the ending to 8. So sulfur will become sulfate. So the name of Li2SO4 is lithium sulfate. And again, oxygen is not mentioned here. If it ends in 8, automatically that tells you there is an oxygen in this compound. Okay, now we have